Hello, and welcome to the Bite Size Theology Podcast Extended Edition, episode 29. Coming to you from three fellas who aren't the sharpest banana in the box and are so dumb they can't even get that analogy right. It is Friday, the 8th of May. I'm your host, Aaron Lively. Joining me this week is Sage Blaylock.
I get it. Apples are typically the sharp fruit.
No comment. And John McCord.
Yeah. Joke inserted here.
John, you're really getting lazy with those opener jokes.
Yeah, I know, man. I've stumbled the last couple of weeks, but you keep throwing sharp bananas at me. What are you supposed to do?
I mean, exactly. What are you supposed to do?
Yes. That
seems to be the problem. That seems to be the problem. We don't know how to answer that question.
Look, man, it's not my fault you guys don't understand fruit. I've been trying to explain it to you for centuries. All right. Welcome. First of all, we got to start off with our new tradition, which is hopefully a temporary transition, but it's a temporary tradition. But at this point, who knows whether it is or isn't? What is your quarantine ranking on a scale of 1 to 10? Where are you guys at? How you feeling? How's the quarantine going for you? Don't pull any punches. Or any kisses, if you prefer.
Pull any kisses?
Don't pull any kisses. Punches and kisses are opposites. So maybe you've had a pleasant quarantine experience.
Are you keeping track? Do you remember what the score was last time? Because I was a 7.66 repeat. Okay. My hair just keeps getting longer. 7.333 repeat.
All right. That was a quick summary. So it's only the hair. I need to clarify this. It is only your hair growing out that makes this worse.
Yes, there is not a single other thing happening in my life right now that would in any way negatively impact my rating other than the fact that I can't get my hair cut.
Wow. Good to know. All right. John, how about you? Scale of 1 to 10.
What was our last time? Like a 2.3? Right.
No, you were 1.5, I think.
1.5.
You were down there, baby.
Oh, yeah. So my wife got her first 2 days off in a row. So we actually had a legitimate weekend. So that brought me up to a 3. But
Wow.
then I have to do this episode today where I have to talk about emotions. And so that brought me back down to so I'll say a 1.6. 1.6 in the spirit of Sage, a 1.64321.
I love it.
You guys are the worst. I don't remember where I was at last time, honestly. I think it was a 7. No, 6.5. I was at a 6.5. I'm going to stick with that ranking. Absolutely nothing has happened between then and now. Or things might have happened, and I just am too delirious to understand whether they have or haven't.
I would also just like to point out that our entire ranking system, we are on different ranking systems, much like our movies. Because, for me, a 5 is an average day. Me at a 5 is a normal time. And I feel like y'all are going with 10 being a normal time because you don't understand how math works.
So I think we've had this conversation before. I've just had so much college that I am operating on a college grading scale. So 7.0 and up is average to, good, great, whatever. Whereas anything under 7 is going to start to be kind of bad.
Right.
So that's where I'm at.
But I'm not a herb who thinks that I have to submit to the educational system just because it tells me that something is correct. So therefore, I go by the natural law, which says if you are average 5 out of 10, then that's normal.
That's Murphy's Law, right?
Yeah, different Murphy, brother to the other Murphy.
Eddie Murphy. That's Eddie Murphy's Law.
Oh. Well, that's the sound of a podcast getting started, everyone. Thank you for watching or listening Yes, you can watch us now, might I remind you. So if you would prefer to watch this presentation, or maybe you already are and you're wondering why I'm even saying this, you can find us on YouTube. Just search for us at Bite Size Theology, and you can find us there. And before we actually do get started, I do want to do something a little different. If you're listening to this, I normally plug Patreon, but I instead, this time, just want to ask if you could write a review of the podcast. Why ask if you could write a review? Because, well, it only takes a minute of your time. And it also is the single most important thing you could do if you want to show your support. So writing a review is what helps us keep the lights on, helps keep us honest, but it also allows other people to see this podcast. So please, if this podcast has helped you at all, or if you like what we're doing here and you think other people would like it too, go to your podcast platform, drop us a 5-star review. Or if you want no one to ever see anything about this podcast, avoid reviewing us so we just stay in obscurity forever, which is cool. Or you could tell us we're terrible. That's, whatever floats your boat, but we'd prefer some feedback.
Aaron, I have a question.
Yeah.
Let's say in theory that I'm listening to this podcast on my phone in my favorite podcast platform.
Mm-hmm.
Can I put that review in while still listening to the podcast?
You can, believe it or not. If you would prefer, now listen here, if you're driving, you should probably pull the car to a complete stop, pause this podcast so you're not distracted while you're sitting on the side of the road, because who knows what might happen. Like a gazelle could come screaming out of the woods.
Possible. Totally regionally specific,
yeah.
Of course.
Absolutely. So if that is the case, please pull your car completely over on the side of the road and drop us a review. However, the wonders of technology are so amazing these days that if you were to continue listening to this podcast and write us a review at the same time, you could totally do that. You can multitask. Look at the age we live in. One task is not enough. Do everything at once and drop us a review while listening to us if you can. After you've listened to that, you probably changed your review score a little lower. I'm sorry to hear that.
Maybe going forward, we should tell people to just do the review first and then, unpause.
And then talk about sharp bananas.
Oh, yeah, you're right. Okay, we should reverse our priorities.
Yes.
Okay. All right, let's opening segment this thing up, shall we? Opening segment is straight into the main topic. Now, I'll give you one guess about what we're doing. Can you guys just let me know what you think we're doing for this one?
So is this like charades?
No.
Is it a series of lectures on how the Industrial Revolution impacted the arc of mankind?
Yes. No.
Well, go on.
All right. Without further ado, we will go straight into our main topic. So for those of you who have been listening to us so far, for the last couple episodes, we've kind of, we've been getting a little heavier and starting to sort of share some of our experiences with deconstruction, which can be a really scary experience. And Sage and I have already gone into some of the things that we've faced relatively recently. Sage talked a bit about what he was going through his education. I went into some of the things that I was feeling recently. And now, John, we're going to be talking a little bit about what you've been processing lately. And I actually don't have too much of a glimpse on the details. I know you mentioned some things about it, but more in passing and not in a super lot of detail. So, this is just you kind of bearing your soul, man. And just talking a little bit about some of the stuff you've been feeling and processing and some of your own distance and yeah, I don't know. I'm not going to really lean into the introduction too much. I'm just going to let you take it away.
Yeah.
So yeah, John, go ahead and tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah. So for me, like I'm at an interesting place in my faith because for the last, like, honestly, and we'll get more into like the timeline of this, but really for the last like 6 months or so, I've been circling this thing where like I was circling like another point of my faith where God reveals something to you, or you get clarity on something, and you have that thought of like, man, was I even a Christian before I understood this? Like, I think that happens throughout your journey where God reveals himself, or clarity comes, and you have a perspective that deepens your relationship. And so mine is really, it's a 3-year process. I was in full-time ministry for 2 years. Before that, I guess I was in full-time ministry for like 3 years. And then the year before those 3 years of full-time ministry, I was in Costa Rica for 10 months, doing some mission work, studying theology. And so this whole process, really, I had never sat down and really thought about, especially with the scars of of the years in ministry. And let me just start off with this. Let me give a disclaimer. Okay. Before I really kind of get in the details of this, I just want to make something clear. Like, the two churches that I was blessed enough to pastor, I freaking love. Like, they are the greatest group of people. They are wonderful, and they mean more to me than I can possibly express. And so if any time during this I seem negative, which I don't think I should, but just on the off chance that I do, like I love those groups of people. I love the congregation more than I can possibly express. And so that's the first thing. And the second thing with that is I love the church. I love the church. There was actually a specific moment for me where I was sitting in a room. I was a pastor of a decent sized church, and sitting in a room looking at members of the congregation wrap and give out toys to the community so that parents could have presents to give to their kids on Christmas. So like, I was watching this group of people provide Christmas for their community, like completely for free, out of their own time. It took months and months of work. And I was watching this, and it was a group of 30 plus people, all over the age of 45. There wasn't a single young person there. And it was at that moment where I was done criticizing and piling on the church unnecessarily. Like, yes, the church in general, the American church, has a ton of issues. And yes, we are sick. We are. But I feel like there's this spirit now of people walking through the terminal ward of the hospital, looking at the ill patients and being like, hey, you're sick. And haha, you're sick. And it's just like, yeah, and you're a jerk. Like what do you do? Do you have a solution? Or are you just going to walk through this like struggle and just throw stones from afar? Because, if we claim to love Jesus and all we do is castigate without ever walking side by side with somebody, then we're a liar, or at least misinformed, And so I love the church, and early in my life, I could not have said that, but now, like, the church, when the church is the church, is the most beautiful institution, and it's the most beautiful thing. And it's also the bride of Christ. And you can't love Jesus and hate his wife. Like, you just can't. And then the last part of the disclaimer and kind of brief thing is, I can't go into as much specifics as I'd like. If it was just us three sitting around, like, I could tell the specifics of a lot of the stories that I'll allude to, but they're not my stories. Like, there's a lot of personal details, and I'm not going to break the trust of anybody. So I have to be a little bit more vague than I'd like to be. But yeah, but before, like I got messed up by these last 2 years. Like, well, last 3 years, 2 years of ministry, and then this third, like I got seriously messed up, because I was in situations that definitely were not easy. They were not cookie cutters. My wife and I were kind of on an island, um, and saw and dealt with some things that were hard, and I mean that in the most heavy sense of the word. But to give some context on this, like I became a Christian probably around 2015. Like, we could have the argument about whether or not I was saved before then. Like, I think that probably happened around freshman year of high school. But y'all know me in college, like, I was not living for Christ, like, by any stretch of the imagination. And then I went down to Costa Rica and kind of had an experience where Jesus called me into to stop being saltless salt, or at least to know him. And so 2015 that happens. I get back, and then in like 2017 I am asked to pastor this small little church. So in my mind, I was not qualified, definitely like too young to be doing it. I was going to seminary at the same time, which definitely didn't help. And then the biggest thing that hit me was, like, I hated the word pastor. Like, to be a pastor to me was like the most disgusting thing that you could possibly be. Like, it was one of those words that, like, I would say and then like spit. Like, it was awful. And so, going into that first year of full-time ministry, I had all of that kind of unsettled. And so that is my like opening disclaimer and my introduction. The rest of it is going to be broken down into years. So before we dive into like year one, is there any like questions, comments, anything stirring, any clarifications needed before we dive into this first year?
So I have a question, but I think it'll probably best be answered after you sort of go through what the last couple of years have been like.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I can lay it out now, and then you can think about it. And when you get to the end, I can bring it back up, or you can answer it however you want to do it. But given what all you've been through, especially for people who don't know, because we've had some conversations about this, but what do you see as like your potential role in ministry going forward? That can be specific, this church has reached out to you for X, Y, Z, or just in general, what do you see your, role in ministry going forward?
Well, so this last year has been really answering that question. And like when we talk about this last year 3 of this 3-year deconstruction, it'll kind of become more clear. But now more than ever, I understand, like I'm pretty confident in my calling, that like I'm called and gifted in such a way that pastoral ministry is what I want to do with the rest of my life. Which is funny because I still have that thought in the back of my head that can't stand the word pastor. But that's a me thing, and that's something that like I'm still wrestling with. But now more than ever is this clarity in my life for moving forward, that's what I want to do with however long God gives me. Is I want to be in pastoral ministry, which going through these next couple of years, you'll think I'm crazy until we get to the end. But yeah. But let's just dive into year one, and we'll get it going. Year one of ministry, I was pastoring a small little church in a rural part of Tennessee, and it was a great experience and a hard experience, but it was like a year where I learned how to actually be a pastor. Like, I remember sitting in my office after the 3rd week of church and being like, oh, I've got to preach again on Sunday. And that was what I had. like I had 3 sermons and I've preached them all. Like, okay, time to figure this out. And so then you're sitting in front of the, like, literally the best thing that happened in my entire ministry was that moment. I was looking at my desk. I had my Bible on it. And I was like, well, I guess we'll just preach this. And so that's why, like, my style of preaching is like more exegetical, more, like, we're just going to tear in. We're going to talk about 2 verses in Genesis today. And so, like, that was the consistency of preaching was something I learned. Church leadership in general, how to run a meeting, especially at that time, I was 23, how to command a respect and also make wise decisions in a room full of people who are much smarter and wiser than you. And somebody told me something that was really great advice. They said, John, as a pastor, you don't need to be the smartest person in the room, but you always need to be the most mature. And I was like, I didn't understand how great of advice that was until really in it. And that's just great advice. Like, if in a room full of people screaming, the pastor is the one who needs to be calming, And so, also the thing that, first funeral was in that year. First time I'd ever seen somebody die before. Been in the room where somebody took the last breath and been with their families in a pastoral role. And like, that's that is a learning experience, and honestly, like, I said, like, I was going to seminary during the time of that year. I would be in those experiences, and then I'd go to a classroom where I felt like, and this is my own personal experience, I'm not trying to castigate all seminaries, where I felt like the seminary was almost making fun of that. And it was just like, what are we doing? Like, well, I'm in a room and full of people trying to get trained to go into these situations, and I'm getting smacked in the face, and I know that, like, if I'm going to stay here and if I walked out the perfect student that they were trying to make me, then I'm going to fail in ministry. Like, if I stayed the whole time and came out the perfect seminarian in their eyes, then I'm never going to live out into what Jesus is calling me to be. And again, my own personal experience, I don't want to put that on anybody else, but like, that was a big thing. But in that first experience, like, I remember watching a college football game as we're waiting for somebody's family member to pass away. And like, in that moment, like, that was like, we're all sitting around this person watching college football. And it was like, that was the first time in my life I've been like, this is ministry. This is exactly what it looks like, just being with people, like being Job's friends before they open their stupid mouths. Like, if we can just be here, but Sage, I think you put in the chat, you have a question.
Yeah. So you said you felt like in seminary, and I don't know if this is the professors or students or a bit of both, it felt like they were making fun of that sort of situation. Can you kind of explain what exactly you mean by that?
Yeah. So they, and I'm going to keep prefacing this every time, my personal experience. And it could have been just my own stubborn ears at the time. But the separation that was believed in between, like, the people in seminary and the people who really thought they had all the answers, and the congregation who needs somebody to walk with them, right? Because, like, another great piece of advice I got going into ministry, they said, like, a guy said, John, if you can be the best preacher in the world, or the best pastor who is just there for the congregation, be a crappy preacher. Because if you're a terrible speaker on Sundays, but you are a great pastor Monday through Saturday, that is going to be the work of Christ. And I felt like seminary was built to give you enough head knowledge to be able to maybe preach a good sermon, but sure, assert your theological dominance on anybody who might disagree with you. And rather than training to walk beside somebody. But at the end of the day, it's really unfair for me to say all that, because I fundamentally believe it doesn't matter what degree you have on the wall. when you're in a room where somebody passes away with the family members, there's nothing to say. Death should not exist in this world. Death exists because we broke the world. Death is not supposed to be here. So like no words that you could possibly say in the moment is going to solve, us breaking the world. And so like, I don't know. I just felt like where I was at, I would go to classes where people seemed to be looking down or making fun of the people that I was serving. And that didn't sit right with me. Does that answer your question at all?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Yep. So like, yeah, I mean, in this time too, I really started to kind of develop my own theology around pastoral ministry, which I still like really hold to, or I hate the way that we view pastors in the American church, especially in the rural American church, where we almost think that they're like your high priest, right? And you have to talk to them so they can talk to Jesus so that they can talk to you. And it's like, no, like absolutely not. Jesus Christ died for you. A pastor didn't, so talk to Jesus. But the big thing that happened is there started to become this split in me where when I was doing a pastoral thing, when I was in a pastoral role serving, I felt God so close. It's like he was breathing on me. It's like we were in the same room. It was wonderful. And then I'd leave a pastoral situation and I would just feel so alone, where I felt like God was so distant. And so it caused me to study super hard and try to be the best pastor I possibly could, because anytime I was preaching a sermon, anytime I was, digging in to write a sermon, anytime I was showing up for people, anytime I was doing any kind of congregational care or doing church leadership, it felt like me and God were as close as we had ever been. But then the second that I was driving home, I just felt so alone. And so that really started to mess me up, because I was like, I need to be a better pastor, or I need to always be a pastor, because anytime I'm not a pastor, I just feel dropped. And so I went into like a pretty heavy depression, probably as bad as college for me, which college was bad. So yeah, so that was the end of year one. So any comments, questions at the end of year one? All right, fair enough. So then we get to year two. Year two, we get moved to a bigger church. I was in the Methodist denomination. We get moved around a lot. And so my wife and I go to this bigger church. And, at this point, we're pretty good at our jobs. And I definitely say we, because if you're a married pastor, your wife is on full-time staff, assumed, like, even though they don't pay her a paycheck or him a paycheck, depending, they are on staff. And so my wife is as big a pastor as I ever was. So we're good at our jobs. And then all of a sudden in the Methodist denomination, there becomes this denominational split that has been happening for a long time. And so, we're 23, 24, I'm 23, 24, and we're in this new place in as big a church as we've been in. And there's a denomination like yelling at each other and cracking above us. And I love my district superintendent. He's the best boss I've ever worked for. I hate my bosses in general because I'm Scots-Irish and I have a problem with all authority, but like I loved, but it was just another thing. It was just really, really hard, but what happened too was funny, because when we made the switch to the bigger church, when we went over there, we were we had a meeting, my wife and I did, and we're just like, let's just preach recklessly. Like, let's just actually preach, because if, you know, and if we get fired, we get fired. It's okay. Like we're really okay with that. And so like, and this is kind of when I was when I was a kid, my dad and I went to a church service, and we left the church service. We were eating afterwards, and I was trying to think about anything that I remembered from the sermon. And I asked my dad, I was like, Dad, like, I feel like I feel bad. I can't remember a single thing that the pastor said. And my dad was eating barbecue, and he didn't even look up. He was just like, that's because he didn't say anything. and so like, so my goal was to always like preach in such a way that you're constantly saying something, right? That you're actually preaching the word of Christ, that you're actually preaching recklessly. And like, and that sounds cliche, but when you sit in front of a congregation and are about to preach a hard message, like it's really easy to cop out and just say that maybe they need to hear encouragement, you know, rather than, hey, we're all together too divisive as a congregation. We need to love each other better. Like that's hard to preach in the midst of a divisive congregation, because you're going to get emails and you're going to get people, you know, but like our whole thing, like our constant joke was like, what are they going to do? Fire us? That's fine. You know? The hilarious thing though, was when we started preaching recklessly, like the congregation responded unbelievably well. And it was just this huge lesson of the church leadership, especially again, in my experience rurally, views congregations as like so immature, I feel like. And the church leaders need to get over themselves. Like they just do. Like, I don't know why we feel like we're like set apart and special. It's like, no, like some of you can talk pretty. That's why you're here. Like, you know, and so if you preach the Bible, if you preach the word, if you preach Christ to people, no matter how recklessly, the majority of the time, the people are there to hear that. And I feel like as a culture, we've been lulled to sleep by crappy sermons. And so like, once you hear actually what Jesus is saying, once you hear, you know, like a true message, like there's this response, there's this awakening within people to be like, yes, absolutely. Right. And so like, that was a cool experience, because we're preaching all these messages that I'm pretty sure I'm going to get in trouble for. And the congregation is just like, more, please. Right. Which is wonderful. Especially in the midst of the denominational split. I was at a church that there was a lot of different views on a lot of different things. Some very conservative people, some very liberal people, almost like 50-50. We're preaching and teaching on some very touchy things, and everybody is treating each other so well. And, you know, you're just like, of course, because this is exactly what Christ says. Like, if you're going to follow me, you're going to love one another. And I feel like we're like, I know Jesus says that, but like, come on, let's be real. It's like, no, if Jesus said it, then like, then we need to try to follow it, right? But so all that's going well. The church is going well. Like, God is doing such incredible things. The congregation is wonderful. And I am still so depressed because that split still exists. Anytime I'm doing anything pastoral, God feels so close. And then anytime I'm by myself, or anytime I'm not doing a pastoral role, I feel so alone. And like, God is mountains and mountains away. And so what happened was I just never stopped working. Like, I just went full in on like, I'm going to work all the time. And of course that started messing up my marriage. Right. And so like, the best like example of this is like, my wife and I were eating at a restaurant. We had gone kind of away to get away. And I had a like, I kind of snapped out of it and was actually, for the first time in like months, sitting across the table and actually having a conversation with my wife as like her husband, and not like constantly in my head, not constantly calculating, not constantly worrying about things. Like, we were just in the moment. And we joked that it was like the scene in The Notebook at the end where like the wife finally remembers who he is out of dementia. And she's like, how long do we have? It's like That's like what it felt like. It's like, oh, we have 15 minutes before John, you slip into this like headspace to where all you want to do all the time is work because you're so scared to be alone, because you don't want to feel that depression and you don't want to feel like God is far away. And like it really started, like, I can't express to you like how dark of a place we were at, in contradiction with how amazing the church leadership experience was and how amazing that congregation was and how all the cool stuff that God was doing. And so um I got so stressed that I threw out my back. Literally just like woke up one day and couldn't move. I thought my kidneys were shutting down. Turns out my back just was like, I quit, I'm done. And so I was in bed for like 3 days, taking muscle relaxers and sleeping for 18 hours. It was like my paradise. But like, but like I was laying in bed and I was watching like some stuff on YouTube, and a BuzzFeed like losing religion video came up about the band Gunger. And it was the woman singer of Gunger. I think they're married. I don't know.
Yeah.
And she was talking about their church experience and what led them away from church and what led them away from their faith. And she said, overall, like the thing that got her was it was just so transactional. Everything was transactional. It was so transactional. And I'm laying in bed. I can't move because I've been so stressed that my back quit. And I'm like, you're wrong, Gunger lady. It's not transactional. And I start racking my brain of why it's not transactional. And I can't come up with a single example, because my entire thing was I have to keep earning pastor points so that God will love me. I have to become a better pastor. I have to become a better Christian so that God can do more cool stuff through this ministry, so that more people can know him and read their Bibles, so that. And that messed me up so bad, because I'm like, it's not transactional. I've been told it's not transactional. At one point, I believed it wasn't transactional. I'm preaching as if it's not transactional, but in my own experience, as I'm trying to live radically for Jesus, it's just so transactional. And so this all culminated, and I can't go into details in this story, but with the thing that like broke me, there was someone who was sick in our congregation. I felt very strongly that like I was supposed to go pray for this person. I tried to do enough good stuff, earn enough good pastor points, and believe hard enough that God could actually heal this person through me. And it didn't work, and they immediately died. And I thought that I killed them, because I was like, I'm not a good enough Christian. I messed up the whole spiritual thing, and this person died because I suck, right? Because in my head, I didn't earn enough points, and they died. And so that like, and I know that sounds so immature, and I know that there's probably pastors or people listening to this, and they're just like, oh, you're an idiot, whatever. And you know what? Fair enough, I am, but I can't express to you like the trueness of how that felt. And how dark of a place we were in. And so we kind of made the decision to step away. My wife and I did, to work on our marriage again, to work on our faith, and to kind of see, one, do we really want to do this whole pastor thing for the rest of our lives? And two, what is going on, right? Like, why does this feel this way? Why is God so in the moment when I'm a pastor and so not when I'm not, right? And so like Christ doesn't preach to have a light switch in your life, right? To turn it on and turn it off. That's not God. That's not who we're called to be as people. And so why did I feel like as soon as I flipped on the pastor switch, God was there. And then as soon as I flipped it off, he wasn't, when I was trying to be the same person in all situations. Like I was trying to be the same person preaching a sermon as I was that you'd bumping into the grocery store. And yet this split existed in my life so thoroughly. And so we stepped away. That was 10 months ago, stepped away. And that was the end of the second year. So before we kind of get into year 3 and kind of these conclusions and all the frankly amazing stuff God has been teaching, any questions with that whole thing?
Yeah, John, I have a question. You say there was sort of a switch, when you were in a pastoral situation and when you were not. When you were not, I guess what were you doing in the times where you weren't on as a pastor? Did it still feel like you were did it still feel like you were loaded with a lot of stuff from being switched on, or like, I don't know, what did that consist of? What was your offline time like? When
I'd go home, when I'd be by myself, when I'd be not doing like pastoral things, like when I would be playing 2K with Sage, when I would be reading a book, when I would try to relax, God felt so distant from me. Anytime that I was not wearing my little pastor hat, like visiting people, preaching, studying, anytime that I was not in that direct role, God just felt so distant. Actually, like super honest confession time, the reason this podcast exists is because of that. Because I wanted to create more teaching. I wanted to create more preaching because I did not want to be alone, because I even if I was like trying to pray, I still felt so distant. But I felt so close to God anytime any kind of teaching was going on. And so you start trying to fill your time with only teaching, taking any speaking engagements you can, and, trying to start a podcast because you just don't want to be left alone. Yeah. All right. Ready for year 3? This is a more positive year for sure. So year 3 starts. So June of last year, we moved back to Kingsport, take a couple jobs, not ministry jobs. And we're processing this whole thing. I'm still missing being a pastor like crazy, because like I firmly do, especially now, like I believe that that's my calling. But here at my wife's looking at me like, are you crazy? Like you were so depressed. Like, why are you like wanting to do this thing that like broke you? And it's just like, I don't know. I just feel like,
like every sports coach who retires feels better, but they're like, I just want to coach again. And their wives are like, you didn't talk to me for 3 years while you were coaching. Why would you want that?
Yeah, pretty much. And so I'm like for months and months processing this. Why does God feel so distant when I'm not directly serving him? Why is this Gunger lady's transactional claim bouncing around in my head, right? Why can I not disprove this? Why is my experience backing up that all of Christianity is transactional? And then, I was sitting in a church service when the pastor was preaching on he wasn't preaching on this, but he just mentioned the thief on the cross, right? Just mentions it in passing. And my mind latches onto that. And I don't know why. And I'm sitting there, not listening to a word he's saying anymore, and just like going over the thief on the cross. And it just like clicked and broke me, but in the best possible way. Because the story of the thief on the cross, you have one thief on each side of Jesus. And one thief is like, hey, God, get me down from here. If you are who you say you are, get us all off. I'm tired of being crucified. Like, let's get off this crap. The other thief looks at him and says, like, would you shut up? Like, do you know who this is? This is the Son of God. He doesn't deserve this. We deserve this, but he doesn't deserve this. And then he looks at Jesus and says, remember me. And what I heard that when I read it, like the thing that went through my head was like, I just want to be with you. Take me with you. Wherever you go, I just want to be with you. And that simple thing, and of course, I mean, Jesus' response, cool, come on, like, like that simple thing was the answer for me. Because my entire like theological education and my entire theological construct, while I preached a gospel that was not transactional, in my head, I had this, that if you didn't learn these theological bullet points, then you didn't know what you were talking about. Like, we tell people that the gospel is Romans Road, right? Well, Jesus didn't come down and preach Romans Road over and over and over again and say, if you don't know this, then you can't come with me. And why are we preaching 4 out of sequence verses in Romans as the primary gospel when Jesus's entire message, like throughout any of the gospels, like why are we quoting Paul when we want to talk about Jesus? Like, why aren't we quoting Jesus first? And it came to this conclusion that like, no, it's just Jesus. Like it's only him. And so why substitutionary atonement, why Romans Road is absolutely true. Jesus's entire message and gospel was like, repent, the kingdom of God here, which is essentially, he just kicks down the door. It's like, I'm here. Okay. Follow me. Like, love me. I'll love you. Know me. Listen to what I'm saying and come on. Because the thief on the cross had no idea what Romans Road was. Didn't know it. Didn't know anything that Jesus had done. Didn't know. But yet he looks at Christ, says, hey man, I just want to come with you. And Jesus is like, yep. Right? And so for my own life, I had been trying to reinforce this Tower of Babel to reach the heavens by myself. God, obviously, you don't love me enough to teach me, and you don't love me enough to actually bring me along. So I'm going to learn as much as I possibly can. Stack theologies, stack numbers of time I've read the Bible, stack cool little quips and quotes and sermons on top of each other to knock on your door because you don't love me enough to teach me, when all the while, if I would have just listened to any of the things that I was learning and actually connected it, I would have realized that no, God destroyed the Tower of Babel because he's like, I sent my son to die for you. I already did it, right? And so it was just like my theology moved from like, this is how recent it was. I remember sitting in this room saying my theology was black coffee in the Bible. Don't give me sugar in my coffee. Don't give me anything else in my Bible. It has moved from that to solo Christo, only Christ, just Jesus. And so the best way I know how to describe it any better than this is I was worshiping the Bible, but not who the Bible's about. Like, I stopped there. If I can just quote this book better, then everything will be okay. All the while, I'd never connected any of it to Christ. I could tell you Christ, all these things about Christ, the same way that I could list off Tom Brady's statistics, but I've never met Tom Brady and I had never truly like learned about Christ, right? The funny thing is then the split made sense because God was using and was not going to let me mess up a congregation of people. Like, my heart was in the right place. Like, I want to teach people your word. So God was like, I'm going to be here, and I'm going to make sure that you are not going to, preach heresy, that you're not going to destroy people's lives, because your heart's in the right place and you want to be used, and that's wonderful. But I'm not going to reward your transactional faith in the stillness. God wasn't in it. He's not going to let me live in a way that's untrue. And I was trying to live out my own transactional faith as radically as I possibly could. And it didn't work. It didn't hold up. It was not sustainable, because the gospel is not about what you do. It's not about you building a tower, right? It's about what Christ has done for you. And it's just Jesus. And then something like the Sermon on the Mount makes sense, because the Sermon on the Mount is not a list of like, do this, do this, do this, do this. Jesus is sitting there like, I know that you've heard it say don't murder. Like, I know that you keep trying to follow these 10 commandments, but I say to you, Jesus, don't be angry, because it's not about the 10 commandments, it's about me. It's about Christ, right?
Mm.
And like, for me, again, it was like, if Jesus is sitting there saying like, I am more important than the 10 commandments, then it's not transactional at all. It's purely relational, right? Because God wrote the 10 commandments, humanity put it in a box and just carried it around. Like, if God is saying he's bigger than that, if God is saying it's more relational than that, then it's more relational than anything. And obviously, if you love Jesus, you're going to follow, and there's going to be this fruit that looks like you're checking boxes, but you're not going to be checking boxes. You're just going to be doing it out of pure love for who God is. And then it comes to like, I can't believe how much he protected the churches I was in, yet was challenging me. Because when I listen back on the sermons that I preached, and when I read some of the things I wrote and talk to some of the people, it's all about how much God loves you and you don't have to do anything for it. All the while, when I would go home, I would try to earn God's love. And it's hilarious, because if I would have just listened to a dang sermon that I preached one time, but I was preaching against myself the whole time, which is funny, because that's exactly what most of us need to hear, that it's not about you checking boxes. It's not about you building a tower. It's not about you learning as much theology as humanly possible. It's about you meeting somebody, right? It's about just Jesus, solo Cristo. And I relate so much to the thief on the cross, because like in my core, in my soul, I kept trying to pile theology on this voice that just looked at Jesus and said, I just want to be with you, right? And I felt so guilty that that's all my theology was, because I'd been taught by the American church and by my theological, that if you can't quote these things, if you can't say these things, if you can't check these boxes, and if you do X, Y, or Z, or don't do X, Y, or Z, then Jesus doesn't love you, but it's not transactional. And you're just like, it doesn't make sense, especially when practiced. But then you read the word of God and you know who Jesus is, and you're just like, or we're teaching it wrong. We just got really good at teaching it so wrong, And so, I don't know. Now it's hilarious, because I stand at this place where I look back and I'm so thankful for the silence that God gave, because it's the kindest thing. Because it shows me that God was looking at me being like, you do know I love you more than you can be useful to me, right? Like, I love you so much that I don't care how useful you're being or how great of a pastor you are. I love you more than that. And so I'm not going to sit here and reaffirm this thing where you're trying to earn my love, because that's not who I am, right? And then I see how he protected the two churches. And I listen back and read back, and I'm so grateful that he's so much smarter than me and a redeemer, and that there's no like transactions within my sermons. And the only explanation for that is because God is so much better than me, right? And so much smarter. And so it's the thief on the cross is like the thing that broke me. And that was like the final step. And it deconstructed me in the best way. Because now, like, now I think about my faith as nothing more than, this is going to piss some people off, drinking a beer with Jesus. Because that's my favorite thing to do in the world, is sit across the table and drink a beer with somebody. And I think about like that intimacy with Christ is like, because he's the cornerstone, not anything that I could possibly know about him, just him. And obviously I need to study and I need to learn so that I can know him more, but not so that I can justify myself. And so that whole thing is, that entire 3 years led, I should have just read The Thief on the Cross way earlier. Yeah. But like now I stand in a place where I just can't wait to see what God does. You know, I want to get back into pastoral ministry pretty bad, because now when I look across the table from somebody and say like, Jesus loves you, I know that that's true because I see how much he's loved me, right? And when I sit across the table and say it's not transactional, I'm like, yeah, God didn't talk to me for 2 years because he was not going to reward my transactional self, you know? And it's just, it hurts, but it's kind. So yeah, that's the best way that I can phrase it without going in too much specifics. But any thoughts, questions? Are you going to tell me I'm wrong? Because I'll fight you.
I think you're wrong, but Aaron, you go with your.
All right. All right, that's okay. It's a sneak preview of Sage's question. So no, I do actually have a couple questions. It's kind of like a two-parter.
Yeah.
Man, one of the things that I love about you, and I actually do mean this because I think we're wired in sort of opposite ways in this way, but we're also coming to similar realizations about how love for Jesus is really all that matters, you know?
Yeah.
But one of the things that I actually do love about you is that, you just do things, like you'll just try something. I mean, you brought up the idea of like the preaching recklessly and stuff like that. It's like, it's cool that you just generate those kinds of ideas and just want to do something about it. And, if things are wrong, you want to try doing something about it. So my question to you is, how do you feel like Jesus telling you, just come and be with me? Just come and be with me and occupy the same space as me and enjoy me. How is that challenging you even today?
Well, I mean, so when I sit now in stillness, it feels like Christ is in the same room. When I do not take that for granted, because I know what it's like a couple times in my life to hit my knees in an earnest fashion and not get anything. And it just feel like I'm talking to a ceiling fan. Both times I look at those experiences now, I realize how kind of an action it was. Still hurts. But the thing now, the challenge is when I sit with Christ, it's just this constant reminder that this is what it's about. Because I am somebody who just does things, but now I know that if God could call me to be a pastor, and he could call me to be the next Martin Luther, but if I sat down and said, no, I'm not going to do any of it, and I'm just going to sit and stare at a corner for the rest of my life, I know that God would still love me. And that is not something I believed before. And I also know that my life would not be wasted. Even if I sat in a corner and stared at the wall, my life would not be wasted because I know God. And just that is worth everything. And so, yes, I want to serve him because I love it. And it's what I'm passionate about. But I know beyond a shadow of a doubt that if I didn't, I would still be loved by him. And my life would not be wasted because I got to experience what an awesome creator created us.
And yeah, thanks, John. I do have a second part kind of to that question is, you mentioned sort of like this dichotomy between the things that you learn in seminary versus your actual experiences as a pastor, that there's this huge divide. So what is your advice for, because again, I think like you and I are wired like in opposite ways, like almost to a fault. Like we lean into the extremes on this one, right? I would rather have in my head the mental list in order, the processing, the peace with Jesus versus the doing. And I'm realizing that about myself a lot. It's like at a certain point, I just have to, as you say, get out of the boat and just step out on the water with Jesus because why not? You know, what do I have to lose? So like for someone like me, what, I mean, I know there's only so much of an extent you can speak to this on, but like, what would be your advice for someone who is in that direction?
Seminary is its own thing. There are great seminaries throughout this country. There are crappy seminaries throughout this country. And you know what? A person could go to a crappy seminary and get exactly what they need from it. A person could spend one semester in seminary and leave and get exactly what they need from it. You know, like God is bigger and God deals with us as individuals. And so the whole seminary thing, if you want to go to seminary, if God's calling you to seminary, absolutely, you know, go where he's calling. I would argue pick a good one. I would also say pick one that doesn't agree with you. Because I learned a ton in my one semester that I'm very grateful for. To like, I do firmly believe though that we need to be doing, because we have to put what we believe into practice to know, one, if it's true, and two, if it works. Right? Peter, you mentioned the boat thing, and that's what I always bring it back to. Peter out on the water with Jesus. If Jesus calls Peter on the water and Peter spends his entire life standing in the boat looking at Christ being like, I believe that I could walk on the water to you. I believe it as hard as I can. I know I can, but never takes a step on the water. He doesn't believe it. He doesn't. It's ethereal. It's philosophical. And so I, to a fault, always step out the boat, and I have drowned several times. But every single time Jesus has picked me back up like he did to Peter. And the cool thing is I spent the majority of my college years hurting people because I was a selfish fool. Ever since God has really either saved me or at least called me, whatever happened in Costa Rica, ever since that time, every time I've tried to step out of the boat and I've sank, those around me have been blessed by my sinking, because it's amazing how much God protects. And because when I'm talking about sinking, I'm not talking about, you know, going and doing cocaine. Like, that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about being like,
that's next episode.
We're talking about, God, I believe this to be true in order to serve you, so I'm going to put it into practice. You know what? I put my faith into practice. You know, I spent a year learning fundamentalist theology in Costa Rica after a childhood of a liberal theology in a conservative place, then went to a liberal seminary in a conservative place, and then went to a very conservative church in the midst of a more liberal denomination. And I had this faith in this theology that I put into practice. And you know what I learned? It was way too transactional. And you know what God did? He blessed me. He broke me down. He brought me to himself, and he used me to help others around me. And so I'm not saying that if you just read the Bible for the first time and have zero thing that you need to go be a pastor. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying that if you want to serve, go serve. You know, if you're a young Christian, maybe God's calling you. God is definitely calling you to your neighbor, right? To try to be friendly, to try to love those around you. He's probably also calling you to like the soup kitchen or the community center, right? And then like in the serving, you figure out your calling, I feel like. But I don't know. I think that the worst thing that's going to happen if you step out of the boat and sink is that you're going to end up with Jesus with his arms around you asking, why did you doubt? And that's not a bad place to be. Darn. I'm hugging Jesus, talking to him.
What a downer.
Bummer. Yeah.
So I have two questions. So the first one, so you touched on this a little bit. So how did your realization, so your understanding that the whole point is just to be with Jesus and that Jesus loves you no matter what? So like, how has figuring that out and realizing that everything we're supposed to do isn't transactional, sermon prep isn't so God will love you. Reading the Bible isn't so God will love you. Prayer isn't so God will love you. How has that realization changed all of those things? So like, how does that change how you read the Bible, how you've prepared? Because I know that you've preached a few times since then. How has that changed how you prepare for those sermons?
Oh, it's been wonderful. I mean, because I was scared that my immediacy and my motivation would be gone because I'm a very competitive person, and like I hate to, and this probably isn't good, but when I went into pastoral ministry, I was like, I'm going to know more than every seminary student. I'm going to be the best preacher in the world. Like Billy Graham ain't got nothing on me, because that's just who I am. If you play me in checkers, I want to crush you in checkers. Like that's who I am. The funny thing though is like when I preach now, it is like, it's like I'm trying, I'm not defending God anymore. Like when I say Jesus loves you, like I know how much that's true because I watched God break me down because he loved me too much to let me continue believing in transaction, right? When I read the Bible a lot slower now. Like, I definitely couldn't get through it in a year again, because when I read a story about Jesus healing a leper, I cry after it, because you loved somebody enough to touch them, right? And so it is this constant thing of like, I don't know, it just is real. It's just real. And the word for it is intimate, and I'm terrible at intimacy. And so I don't know what to do half the time, but it's way more beautiful now. And it's funny because like now I'm seeing way more fruit in my ministry than I ever have. And I haven't done a thing. Like I'm not a full-time pastor anymore. And like, it has been unbelievable just what God has done in the last 10 months when I have not been the person on the stage, it's just humbling too. And it's just more proof that it's all about him,
Yeah. And my second question is connected to that. So I think the best version of Calvinism is one where we realize that we've been called by God to bring the gospel to the world, and yet we aren't fretting about literally everything and worrying that one misstep or one misspoken word is going to ruin everything and hurt everyone. It's so like it's not all on your effort. So in this sort of realization, you learn how powerful God is and the power of God's will, and that what he wants to accomplish, he will accomplish. So like going forward into like future ministry. So how do you think that's going to change how you do ministry, knowing that it's not all on you?
Yeah.
That if you don't prepare this sermon perfectly, that a bunch of people are going to go to hell, whatever right. The situation is. Like, how's that going to change how you approach ministry?
Well, specifically, the thing that exact thing is part of the reason why I was really messed up, because I refused to let anything go. Like, when somebody died, I mourned them and I refused to stop. And so, like, after a couple of years, there's a lot of mourning going on that you're constantly refusing to let go. When there's a failure, when there's a missed word, when there's a missed opportunity, I refuse to let it go. And I could feel God being like, give it to me. And I'd be like, and I was, no, I'm not going to give you this hurt or this mourning or this frustration, because I need it to be better at my job so that you will love me more. Also, I didn't trust God. I thought that if I gave up my mourning, and like if somebody died and I preached their funeral, I was worried that if I wasn't crying over their death, like for multiple days before their funeral, I was going to go and do a terrible job. Like, just thought that that was the way it worked, because I did not trust God to use me or to take care of me or to be in such a relationship where he, you know, you can not constantly be beating yourself up or reliving all this kind of trauma a little bit and still be effective. I didn't trust God like that. I thought that it was pretty much all on us. So now in like future ministry, like I feel like I'm going to be able to give stuff up to God and let stuff up go more. And that's happened with the job I'm working now, and with stuff like there's a lot of needing to give stuff up to God, just stuff you see and all that. And it's been amazing because it's like it's like me and my wife are walking out to my car and I don't trust her enough to hand her the car keys. You know, it's like, no, you're going to lose it and you're not going to give it to me when it's time to move. And it's just like, what are you, an idiot? Like, like what are you talking about? You know? And so, I don't know. It's when you're in a relationship with God, when you have that intimacy with Christ, you're not worried. It's not, the exchange is way better, both of what to say and what to give up, what to think about in the moment, what to hold in the moment, and what to let go in the moment. And so it's, I don't know. It's really nice to not have to go through something and then be like, well, I got to take that and put it with all this other pain, and we're just going to hold that and hope one day I don't die, you know, because eventually enough pain and kind of turmoil accumulates that your back goes out in the middle and you're 24 years old in decent shape and your back's just like, I quit. I can't do this anymore.
Thanks, John. Thanks for sharing.
Emotions.
Emotions. Yeah, it's been a series.
In a series.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if I guess all I could say is, if you're listening to this and I don't know, if you've listened to the last few episodes and everything, just know that, you know, if you're struggling with similar things or you're having a hard time with similar feelings, like, you're not alone. And there's a place for you, not only in Jesus. Of course, you have a place in Jesus, and he loves you more than anything. But you have a place with us too. You have a place on this podcast, and please feel comfortable writing in questions. Please feel free to share things about what you're going through. I mean, it's not like we're going to have a ton of answers, but we can at least, you know, be praying for you. And we just love you. I mean, we just love you. And thanks for listening to us and some really hard stuff. And Jesus loves you. I mean, that's what it boils down to. Even if you don't have your bullet pointed list in order, it doesn't feel like you do. Take it to Jesus, because even if it feels like a lot to you, he can handle it. And with that, we'll go ahead and close this out, and we'll be back to a more typical podcast format next week. And just wanted to give these episodes a little bit of space to breathe. And yeah, we're looking forward to having you back on with us, and let us know Yeah, I mean, let us know if you have any questions. We're always here. And yeah, thank you for listening, and hope you have a good rest of your week.